How do you gain confidence at work? How do you gain confidence in life? Hi, I'm Cartwright Morris. I'm the host of the Men Are Forged podcast. And this is the question that we discover in this podcast. I could bring on guests, men who have gone before us, top performers in their job, in their career, and in their life and relationships. And how do they gain confidence and move forward through doing hard things? That is the secret to building confidence in your life, is doing hard things and learning how to do them well. To discover more about how I help sales professionals gain confidence and improve their performance, go to menareforged.com and find out more. Now for today's interview. All right, welcome into the Men Are Forged podcast. I'm excited about my guest today, coming from Oregon, but man, he's a Southern man at heart. I mean, he is from the lovely village on the plains. He went to Auburn, like myself, so we have that in common. It's funny how the world shrinks these days. That we could probably pass each other a couple times. But Marcus Farris, I'm excited to market. He is the author of the book No Less Faithful: How the Scars of Divorce Reveal the Heart of God. Dang, that subtitle nails you. So I'm looking forward to diving into that and hearing your story on that, Marcus. But man, it's great to have you in.
Hey man, appreciate it. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah. So I got to start with this because I saw that you're an endurance athlete. And I would love for my audience who knows very little about, and this is something that's going on all around the world. They have championships in Europe, North America. And so I'd love to hear what got you into that, and what is that?
Yeah. So I think what you're referring to is HYROX, which is an event that's called the World Series of Fitness Racing. And it was founded over in Germany in about 2018. When I was in college and late high school, I got into distance running and running ultramarathons for a little while, and then transitioned over into triathlon, and then did some cycling races, and then was doing CrossFit for about the last 3 years. And I found that for me, like I'm a very competitive person at heart. I had a couple of pretty solid race finishes, and there was a time where I wanted to race professionally in triathlon. And after about 6 or 7 seasons of that, I kind of got to a point where I realized I didn't really like swimming that much to keep up that skill level, to stay at that level of competition. But I'd always kind of had a heart to figure out what is that competitive venue where I could compete with the best in the world, or at least the best that I could possibly compete with, whatever that ends up being. And lo and behold, there's this race series called HYROX. Now, I was never like the fastest ultra runner, right? You got the guys who are like 6'3" and 140 pounds that just like fly up mountainsides and like that. I'm not going to get there. And then you also got the CrossFitters who are just monsters at barbell work. And I can kind of hang with them, and then I can kind of hang with the ultra runners. But while I couldn't beat any individual one at their own sport, I could beat the CrossFitters at running, and I could beat the runners at CrossFit. And then HYROX comes along, and it's basically like if a CrossFit Hero WOD had a baby with a 10K, it would be this event. And so the way it runs is it's 8 kilometers of running, which is about 4.8 miles. And you've got 1 kilometer loops. And in between each of the 8 loops, you have a different functional movement. So we're talking ski erg, sled push, sled pull, farmer's carry, sandbag lunges, wall balls, and burpee broad jumps and row. There we go. Okay. So that's 8. Yeah.
Wow.
It's an event that lasts roughly an hour, a little over an hour. The world record is 54 minutes. I came in I did my first one, I guess that'd be about a week and a half ago at Fort Worth. And that one went really well. It was a ton of fun. And I will be doing another one here in a few weeks in Anaheim. So that's HYROX.
Wow. And is it been one of those things? I know there's a Tough Mudder and the some other stuff that's like the Warrior Dash that came out. If they just kind of take it to another level from those, or is this something completely separate?
It's kind of separate. We're not really talking obstacles. Like you're not throwing spears like you would in Spartan. You're not crawling under barbed wire or jumping over walls or anything like that. It's it's a fitness racing.
Racing. Gotcha.
The idea of it is you don't necessarily have to have a ton of technical skill. So, i.e. barbell lifting or javelin throw or something like that. It's more like all of these movements are like anybody can pick up a pair of kettlebells and walk, or the movements are ideally supposed to be as accommodating to everyone as possible. And half of the race is basically running, which what sport worldwide is more accessible than running. I realize not everybody can, but that was sort of the idea at the heart of the event.
Yeah, that's cool. And it sounds like you have really leaned into that you're desiring a higher performance level. So how comprehensive is that? Has that changed much of your diet, changed much of your daily routine and really training for those events?
I would say it's more of a slight modification in the way that I approach training. So I've been since, probably 17 years old, I've figured out like, endurance sports and athleticism is a pretty fun thing to do. Yeah. There's another story about how I kind of got into it, but I've had something like an appreciation of that process for quite some time. So I've had at least 10 competitive seasons of one sort or another before going into this. So in terms of the importance I place on sleep, nutrition, various lifestyle factors that contribute to overall performance, that's already for me been baked in for so long. It's like sometimes I feel like if someone ever were to tell me, oh man, you're so disciplined with just how often you work out and getting up early in the morning and getting after it. And here I am thinking like, do you realize what happens if I don't do that? I start hating life if my doesn't get the requisite dose of your myokines and your dopamines and all that from exercise.
Gosh, that's it. Yeah. That's a message in itself right there. Just, your sanity and how really God made us to move and do things, and certain hormones to fire that lead to other things, and that most of the world we've missed because of first world convenience, right? So Marcus, I'd love to kind of hear more of your story and, really what led to the book. But, first off, I mean, I know you help veterans with Mission 22. Y'all could check out more of that at mission22.com. I mean, it's really great what Marcus is doing to help out veterans, but you're a veteran yourself. And so I love what initially got you into the ROTC and then eventually led you to joining the Army.
Yeah, so let's see. If we rewind the clock back to my junior year of high school, I had just moved back from London after having been there for 2 years. My dad got this job opportunity and we went over there. And while I was there, being 15, 16 years old, I was as socially awkward as humanly possible. The observer might have labeled me somewhere on the autistic spectrum just because of how, let's just say it was hard for me to make friends. But for some reason, I kept wearing like camo pants to school. I don't know why. It was just the little boy in me who wanted to go off and do soldier things. And then I moved to Huntsville, Alabama in 2006 and discovered the junior ROTC program there. And they had what was called the Raider Challenge team, or we called it locally the military skills team. And that I saw one sort of, promotion video for it and saw these kids out in the woods wearing their camo and hauling ammo cans around and jumping over obstacles. And immediately it was like, yes, that's for me. It's interesting. You wonder, like, do we pick our interest or do our interests pick us? And so I saw that and it resonated immediately. And it was like, yep, that's the thing. And from high school, applied for an ROTC scholarship at Auburn because almost all of my family had been there. I have other family members who've been in the military, and it seemed like a natural progression for me. So I did ROTC at Auburn for a little over 4 years, got an engineer degree, headed off to Fort Leonard Wood for my engineer basic course. And then they shipped me off to Alaska, where I was stationed between JBER, which is an installation in Anchorage. And then I was up at Fort Wainwright and Fairbanks for another 2 years doing active duty Army stuff. And so now I'm in the reserves.
Wow. And so I heard did you serve a little bit in Alaska?
That's right. Yep. I was with an airborne unit in Anchorage for a little while at Fort Richardson. And then got an assignment up at Fort Wainwright as a contracting officer's representative with the Corps of Engineers. So it was a good breadth of experience of what all the Army's up to.
Yeah. Man, being in Alaska, man, I imagine that was quite the experience. Sorry. Yeah. So, what really being in the military, I imagine, and then leaving the military, what made you want to start serving veterans that are coming out?
Yeah, I would say it kind of got its origins in my time doing some work with the U.S. Military Endurance Sports Team, which is another nonprofit that basically aids veterans, active duty or otherwise, get into endurance sports with a little lower bar to entry. So triathlon, for example, is a very expensive sport. So is cycling. And the charter of that company was to facilitate that process and make discounts available, make training camps available. And after a couple of years of being on that team, became their triathlon coordinator. And so I got to basically assist with major focus events around the world, or around the United States. And that really spoke to me. It was like, here I am being able to combine two things that I really love and I'm good at. There's that Japanese concept of ikigai, where it's like, what are you good at? What does the world need? And what can you make money doing? And I had two of those three down with the U.S. Military Endurance Sports Team. So the world needed help with veterans getting into triathlon. I really loved that sport and that particular demographic, but it wasn't paying the bills. And well, my career progressed in a way that maybe we'll talk about this a little bit more, but I got to a point where I found Mission 22, which does a lot of work with veterans in the mental health space, looking at a far more ecological approach to care after post-traumatic stress or after combat trauma or after moral injury. And it all just sort of dovetailed into this one collective thing. But what ended up happening was, I went from getting an engineer degree at Auburn to now I'm pursuing a master's in counseling, which are sort of two ends of the spectrum in terms of, one's career trajectory. So what type of personality I have to fit that is another thing that I'm still exploring. But at any rate, that's where I am now. And to be able to sort of integrate all these things has been pretty phenomenal.
That is really, really cool. Just, that is engineers pretty black and white, this works, that versus, as a counselor, you're embracing a lot of nuance and human beings that are complicated, and that's fascinating. And I'm still trying to get over sinus infection, so excuse me. I'm still getting a little drainage. I'm sure you don't miss any of the pollen down south right now because it's pretty bad. But so you lived in Europe. You went to Auburn, been in the military, got an engineering background. I'm curious just what your faith background is. Where was God and what your relationship with God amidst that? Did you grow up in a Christian home? Did you become a Christian later? What was how was God part of your story?
I grew up in a Christian home from birth. My family they had their roots in Southern Baptism. Is that the right word?
Yeah.
Church. There we go. Maybe not Southern Baptism, although I was baptized in the South. But anyway, I've pretty much since I was 3, I had some type of orientation toward God. And I really don't know a time in my life where that wasn't a part of who I was. Although I kind of elaborate on this in the book, there definitely was a point where I had to come face to face with something that was happening in my reality against a worldview that I thought was fully explanatory of how humans behaved. And when those two things come together and they're in opposition to each other, that's when somebody experiences a moral injury. And so I had, over the course of about a year and a half, a process of just reorienting myself to how it is that Christians operate in the world, deeper meanings of what we're told in the church and maybe take for granted to a degree. We can explore any one of these things, but it proved to be a net positive by a long shot of my understanding of how it is exactly that Christ works in such a broken world, and how someone who is sort of the pure, spotless lamb can take on filth, right? The crossing over of the innocent child with the filth of the world. And I kind of experienced that story firsthand, and that can do a lot of people in, because you take for granted how it is that when Christ says you will have suffering in this world, it's like, bro, until you're there, you just don't understand what that means.
Yeah. So I guess that's a good transition. I would love to hear just the origins of the book, which you can buy now on Amazon. No Less Faithful. Yeah. What I would love just kind of get, how you and your ex-wife met, and how the relationship transgressed and what led to the divorce. And, and then obviously I'd love to hear, why you felt it was great to write a book on it. So. Today's episode is brought to you by Thrive Marriage Lab. If you want your marriage to thrive, this is a great opportunity to you, because strong marriages are the bedrock of strong churches, organization, families, and community. This is a 12-month pathway for any of you that are looking to really have weekly engagement with experienced marriage counselors. Not just one, but many. So go to restory.life/thrive to get on the waiting list for this great program that starts in April. That's restory.life/thrive. And make sure you put the word Forge in the promo code to receive a discount on your monthly fee. Now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I guess in college, I always had trouble like finding dates, and with I was never in any kind of serious relationship in college, or even casual relationship for that matter, and that kind of weighed on me a lot, and that started to develop this sort of voice that just kept reminding me, like, look, your track record is terrible. Women are not interested in you. Get over yourself. This and that, and it was pretty distressing for a little while there. We're talking like early 20s. When I moved to Alaska, I was about 23, and I felt like I was able to sort of come to terms with, like, look, this is not the truth. This is not who you are. You need to get that voice of despair out of your head. Like, in Christ's name, let it leave. And after that experience, within a month, I met this girl at a triathlon, and it just felt like, wow, okay, cool. Things are lining up. Like, I've sort of shrugged that off. Here's this new exciting person. She's actually interested in me. This is great. And the relationship kind of went from there. And there were a couple of early warning signs, but I just didn't have the wherewithal to take them as seriously as I should have, because here I was, having never really experienced the excitement of meeting someone for the first time and being all, just beady-eyed for them. And I kind of ran with it. I was like, this is great. There are these warning signs, but we'll figure it out. God makes all things new. And then even after the wedding ceremony, there were some, let's say, signs where it was just like, this is all lining up. This is going to be great. Again, there were warning signs even up to that point, but it was like, well, I guess God's making a new thing out of this. This will be cool. Like, to the point where the sort of signs that I'm talking about were so specific. It was like, I'm being seen right now, and we're going to be good. And we weren't. So about, 3.5, 4 years later was when things started to deteriorate, where she basically recognized that she had a pattern of, what you would consider codependent personality disorder. And so what is that? It's a description of someone who outsources their personality to whoever they're with. And they basically are serial relationship jumpers, where it's like, I'm not going to deal with my own stuff. I will just acquiesce to the next person in line. And she did not have awareness of that. I certainly didn't, because I was just sort of naive in how all these things operated. Again, like, my low resolution worldview did not account for the fact that people can go from behaving in one way and then realizing it's a facade and then behaving in a totally different way very quickly. And it was my curiosity of how it is that progressed that got me into counseling in the first place. So I learned that she had committed adultery at a point where, let's just say, I was not at all ready to hear that. And I knew that there were some things that were kind of going downhill, but that revelation about did me in. And so the way I was trying to make sense of it was just to write. That's kind of my default. I don't paint, I don't draw, I write. And so I just started writing and trying to making sense of this stuff. And after a little while, I kind of got to a point in my manuscript where I was like, I remember looking up on Google, like, how many words is a book? And then I did a little word count on my manuscript. I was like, oh, this is not that far from a book. And I talked to one of my mentors at the time, actually the CEO of Mission 22 now, and he encouraged me, like, you should look into publishing this. And so I got to a point where I started doing some research on it, and lo and behold, one of my old friends from Anchorage, I was in a small group there, is now she owns a business for publishing. And so she basically had all the resources for me. She helped me edit, and I went for it. And it just, so I was separated for about a year and a half in hopes that God would restore and God would make all things new. And it's great that, there are all these other stories in the church of people who commit adultery, and then the relationship's actually stronger as a result. And so I was believing for all of this stuff. despite all of the evidence to the contrary, that was not going to happen. And I had a hard time accepting that. I had a seriously hard time accepting that. And the book was kind of this way of putting all of that to rest. And I discovered that in that whole process, that story, that type of story, A, is not uncommon for a young Christian male to experience someone betraying them out of nowhere, or seemingly out of nowhere anyway. And B, there was just not a whole lot of stuff out there to assist and tell that story. And I found a couple of relationship books and how do Christians deal with divorce and so on and so forth that were sort of limited in their scope of usefulness, but there's nothing specific to what I was going through. So I wrote this book as a way to talk to myself more than anything. And man, I tell you what, like that, there's a section in there where I talk about how do you know that individually you've sort of recovered from that whole betrayal process. And my conclusion was that you don't resent other people's marriages. And that when I kind of got to a point where I was like wishing well, like close family who were getting married and like looking at not through the lens of my hurt, but through the potential of what their story could be, like I saw healing in myself there. And there's a small degree to which that voice is still sort of there for me. I was at a cousin's wedding actually just last weekend, and I started hearing that voice. So like, no, man, that's not true. And like, I recognized it was there and just committed to like not going down that path, because that voice of resentment and bitterness is a vicious monster that has a certain degree of truth and logic to it. But it's not the whole truth. And so you have to, once you're betrayed, it's very easy to think about things in terms of very black and white terms, right? Because then it relieves you of the cognitive strain of thinking in nuance. However, it's like, obviously black and white thinking is what we call in psychology a thought distortion. Like cognitive behavioral therapy will talk about that being one of the ways that it's basically like you discount the good. You say like, well, because of this event, now this is my destiny the rest of my life. Like, I mean, it's a data point, but it's not the whole truth. And that's why stories are so important, because you start to realize that, look, if you're betrayed, if you've experienced a moral injury where you witnessed something that you never had a context for, hey, congratulations, you're now on the hero's journey that Christ went down. And you have an opportunity to understand the nature of sin, the nature that love allows other people to choose, and why that is so painful, because that allows them to choose good or ill. And ultimately, it allows you to nest your story within Christ's story in a much more profound, close way.
Man, that's good. Man, that's something I talk about, and I think it's hard to relay. It's important sometimes, but just the power of your story and realize, that I'm not defined by one event, by one feeling, one emotion. Man, that's really good, Marcus. Man, I appreciate you sharing that. So I mean, my next question really is so it says, you put in the subtitle, "The reveals the heart of God." What in this journey, what did you find out? What did you discover about the heart of God?
Well, one moment really comes to mind. That was when we had maybe 2 or 3 therapy sessions afterward to try to sort out what was going on. And it became apparent through those, like, there's no coming back from this. Like, I kind of knew deep down, like, wait all you want, she's going to leave. And indeed, she was the one who ended up filing and moved away, and who knows. But anyway, so I was on my way home from one of those counseling sessions, and it was just so clear that this was not going to fix itself. Like, unless there was some sort of road to Damascus moment, this relationship was over. And so I remember very specifically where I was stopped at a traffic light, and I yelled out loud, like, "God, why should I have to suffer so much because she's messed up?" Yeah. And right away, it was like, dude, that's what Christ did for you. Dang it. And, so that kind of led me down the road of like a lot of self-evaluation of like, hey man, you didn't do anything to cause her to do that, but what choices did you make? Do you need to take ownership of now that this happened? And also, did you follow all of the strictures which you supposedly adhered to in the early days of the relationship? You were not paying attention to red flags then. You asked God to bless this or for him to tell you if this was a bad idea, but you were not in a place where you'd be willing to listen because you were just sort of overcome with all of this excitement. So how did it reveal more of God? It was like, understanding what the heart of love means and realizing that love, agape love, is one where you fully allow the other person to freely make whatever decisions they want, no matter how destructive they are. But that also is the best and only shot that we have for lasting good relationships in the future. And yeah, so it really taught me a lot about the nature of God's love and the difficulty with which I have to actually live that out, right? There's a mentor once kind of said to me something along the lines of, you never want to have a mission in life where you could hypothetically do it by your own power, right? And so to be able to love somebody else in that way is something that, like, what brings me to the feet of the cross of, like, I just can't do this. Like, and I know it. And that's exactly where Christ wants you. So the whole recovery process too, and getting my book out and all of that, like, so many things came together in such a, well, maybe not short amount of time, but right when it should have, for that to happen. So it was just again and again and again. It was like God was reminding me, you can't do this alone. Yeah. Like, you can do certain things alone if you want to. That's your choice. But guess what? Like, if you do it my way and you surrender that, that's the most powerful place you're going to be in.
Man, that's good. Gosh, yeah, there's something you said that I think is interesting just in my coaching with some men. It's like, even if someone was mainly at fault there, that they the one messed up, that really hurt, there's still some level of ownership and peace that you can take. You're not 100% powerless in that. So, what was some of the self-talk? What was some of your conversation with God and really your reflection of, like, okay, she's really hurt me. She's the one really destroying this and pulling away. But what do I need to learn, or what do I need to own in this process?
Yeah, I think if anyone's ever read the book, The Four Agreements by Don Miguel Ruiz, one of the four agreements is don't take anything personally. And that's, you might think, like, well, in a case of an adulterous situation, how on earth do you not take that personally? Doesn't that other person, aren't they, like, intimate with you? Don't they know you? Like, nobody else knows you? And it's like, well, hang on. No, that can't be right. Because to take something personally is to take what the other person said to you or did to you and appraise it as, okay, that's an accurate reflection of who I am in my totality. Like, no, unless the thing that created you is saying it doesn't reflect all of who you are. Right. And so, so no, it wasn't me she betrayed, it was herself. And in the early days of that relationship, it wasn't there was a sense in which I betrayed my own values early on. Maybe not to such a salient degree, but still, it was like, listen, people do things out of the depths of their own heart, always, 100% of the time. And it's only God who has the right to tell you something personal. Other people cannot. Even with compliments or insults, none of those things are ever 100% accurate of who it is you are in your entirety.
Man, that's good. Man, let me sit on that for a second. That's really good. So one of the things you also talk about with the book is the marriage ended, but his purpose did not. So what do you feel like God is, through the struggle, through the hardship, that he's really redeeming, renewing, and pulling, and really giving you purpose in from this horrible thing that really happened to you?
Well, I alluded earlier to this idea of the hero's journey. If anyone's done any reading or watching of Joseph Campbell, he does a pretty good job of kind of articulating what that is. And you can start to see it in all of the most popular movies that have ever come out. And there are a couple of different story arcs that are kind of embedded in there, but it's a pattern that has been there since the beginning of human existence. And we can see it in so many different religious stories and mythologies and all of that. And I started to see my own story within that particular journey. So in other words, the proverbial descent into the underworld and an encounter with a monster at the depths of the sea started to make more sense. And it was like, oh, okay, that's all right. That's the moment of crucifixion. Christ went down to hell to redeem sinners. Okay, that's seen in the Pinocchio story where he goes down to the belly of the whale. That's the scene in Dagobah on Star Wars where he goes and sees himself in Darth Vader. right? It's confronting. That's the Jungian idea of confronting the shadow and integrating the shadow. What else? That's the Chamber of Secrets, where Harry Potter goes into the depths of Hogwarts and confronts the basilisk. Let's see. That's Weathertop in Lord of the Rings, where Frodo first gets stabbed. That's moral injury. And so I was like, oh, I'm not alone in this. This is a thing. This is like a feature of our story. It's not like something went irrevocably wrong. And then, there's that quote by, I think it's Thoreau, who says, all of us are broken, but some of us are stronger in the broken places. And it was that whole process of working through that made me understand, like, oh, there's a pattern to this. And then I saw that in the story of especially Vietnam veterans, but also in our current cohort of service members, where it's like, oh, how could I teach that same story to them? And my approach, I guess, in therapy, I'm not quite a therapist yet, but let's say my approach in counseling and doing coaching for veterans, when it comes to dealing with things like moral injury, how do I teach the Christian story to them, but meet them wherever they are, whatever the relationship is with Christianity? And you got to go to the depths of understanding what they've gone through. I mean, not fully, you weren't there, but like I've talked to veterans who you wouldn't believe, like, you've got some guys out on patrol, and then 10 meters away, somebody steps on a mine and you didn't, and you just saw them vanish. It's like, okay, what sermon in my Southern Baptist church taught me how to deal with that? Right? It's like, oh,
none.
Okay. So then, well, how do you meet someone who maybe had a split with God after an experience as just profane as that? And my answer so far, and I'm still, I think I could work on this for a lifetime and not fully come to, I'll be learning new things about how to approach this best, but has been to point to those types of stories and like, hey man, like, yes, you're right. Like, you did experience the depths of profanity, and I can understand your reason to default into nihilism where nothing matters and your world's blown apart and all my friends, died downrange and my life is worthless, and that whole spiral. Like, I can understand that, man. Like, when we look at the shadow and we look at the abyss, like, it is a deep, dark place. But check it out. The remedy to that is experiencing something sacred and set apart and holy that can't be touched by profanity of the world. So how do you do that? You have to make sacrifices in the way that you live now. So like, that's sort of an excerpt, I guess, of the type of language that I try to use to explain this process of, like, okay, what are your choices now that you've experienced something that shattered your understanding of how humans operate? Are we going to go down the path of everything's meaningless and who cares anyway? Or are we going to try to tease out, like, what is the purpose behind this? What is the meaning here? How can I take the raw material of things that have been broken down and turn it into, like, use that to turn it into growth?
Yeah. Man, Marcus, you are spitting some good stuff here, man. So right now, just for my audience, even some men out there who aren't veterans, haven't experienced the trauma of war, what's something that you would advise them to help them understand more their story and unpack some of their trauma and really, like you said, get that redemptive arc back in their life and experience something sacred and holy and good?
Yeah, well, I would ask, a couple things there. So all of us are going to make mistakes, and the product of those mistakes are what we can take to then create our world. So what do I mean by that? When I first learned what the word demonstrate meant, it kind of blew my mind and really helped me to understand the process whereby you take mistakes and use those mistakes to make your future. And not in a way where it just permits you to just make mistakes on purpose, obviously. But so the word demonstrate, it means to de-monster. Yeah. It means to take the monster apart into usable pieces. In French, the word is monter, which means to show, which is rooted in monster, right? Okay, so monster is the thing that you confront when your worldview is really getting challenged, when your faith, let's say, is under pressure. Okay, so you take that moment and you de-monster it. You take it apart into little pieces. What happened here? Where are you responsible? Where did other people make decisions that made you feel this way? How is it that you're reacting to stimulus that's outside of your control? Are you seeing the line between things you can control and things that are out of your control. And then you break all of those down into little pieces of, let's see, I can actually control my behavior here. My visceral response to this thing that another person did is actually on me to take responsibility for. They don't cause me to have that reaction. I choose to have that reaction, right? I'm putting my therapist hat on here, but it's a process of seeing like, hey, look, Jesus isn't judging you anymore. If you've accepted him and accepted his forgiveness for your mistakes, he's not sitting up there like scowling, right? But he invites you to take a hard, honest look at where you've been, at what you haven't taken responsibility for, and from that extract ways of updating your worldview such that you can live in the world in a way that is sort of shrewd as serpents, but innocent as doves, if you will.
Yes. Man, and those two things, holding those in tension is such a needed thing. As men, how do we walk in that? Because I think we struggle with that. I think the world struggles with nuance in general, right? They love to live in that black and white, that what's the word I'm looking for? Binary thought process. Yeah. So, yeah. Well, Marcus, man, it's been great having you on, man. You've really brought some good stuff. I'm excited to share this with my audience. What? I got to ask you this question. I asked this one a lot, and you kind of hit on it already. But what would you tell that 25-year-old self if you could speak to them? What message would you share with them?
Don't assume things about your future. We have a tendency to operate in a way that assumes that the things that have happened in our past are predictive of the things that are going to happen in the future, and that's absolutely not true. I'm reading a book right now called Anti-Fragility by Nassim Taleb, same guy who wrote The Black Swan, for anybody who's familiar with that. And he kind of takes a business-like statistical view of it, where he has this thing called the turkey fallacy, where it's like the turkey assumes every single day, like, oh, the guy who's feeding me is my friend, and they're going really well. And then, there's one bad day, right? But I would say, like, look at the reverse of that. Like, man, things have been going kind of bad for a little while. It just seems like I keep trying for this thing and it doesn't happen, and I'm trying the same thing and it's still like I just can't break through this thing. You got to make room for the miracle, right? I mentioned before that a lot of things came together that were out of my control, that sort of came to me at the right time, that provided for me to be able to move forward. And it's often the case that God's going to have you grinding away at something for a while to teach certain lessons, and then something just sort of mysteriously sort of opens up. There's that sort of provision of manna that falls in your lap one day when you're sort of in a posture to take it. And yeah, so don't assume that the things that have happened to you are your destiny. It's easy to say, but man, it's something that can be really difficult to shake off. Yeah, man. Well, Marcus, it's been a pleasure, man. I really appreciate, man, you just coming on, sharing your story, man. That's so impactful. I mean, it just really does show just all the healing and redemption that's come from really dealing with something that's really hard as divorce. Appreciate you sharing this, man. And so, yeah, I would love for you just kind of give a plug for the book, and also, yeah, where some my listeners can find you and connect with you. Yeah, so again, the book is No Less Faithful, How the Scars of Divorce Reveal the Heart of God, available on Amazon. You can find me on Instagram at UltraRunFarris, where mostly you'll see me posting things either about my dog or my race performances. I have a blog that is linked in the bio of my Instagram. And yeah. Awesome. Well, Marcus, thanks for coming on, man. It was great. Hey, I'm grateful for the time. Thank you. Thanks for listening to the Men Are Forged podcast. If you want to find out how top performers gain confidence on a regular basis, you just got to go to menareforged.com and put in your email address, and you will be sent a video about how to do that. It is the process that I've been developing and working in with my clients, and it's part of my coaching program as well as my keynote. So go to menareforged.com to find out more information about how you can gain confidence and become a top performer in your field.